Welcome back to Ozarks Tonight. It was an above average December temperature-wise here in the Ozarks, but many folks around here are wondering exactly what the rest of the winter holds. Chief Meteorologist Jamie Warriner is joining us today. Thanks for being here, Jamie. What's the rest of the winter looking like?
Well, let's kind of recap what we've seen and where we are right now. And if we go back, let's go back to November. You know, going into the winter season, the thoughts were that we were going to have a colder than normal winter, that we were going to have opportunities for a snowier winter, certainly than we've seen. I mean, we're coming off of several years where the winters have been very lackluster in terms of snowfall especially, but even temperatures have been warmer than normal the last several winters, although we did have a pretty significant bout of cold last winter, late December into January. Now we are here in the winter of 2018-2019, and again, going into the winter season, it looked like, colder than normal and snowier than normal. Well, November kind of played into that playbook because we had a very cold November, one of the coldest on record for the Ozarks, and it was colder than normal across much of the United States. And we also had snow in several areas over several occasions, even here in Springfield, officially just shy of 2 inches of snowfall for the month of November. And then the cold and the wintry weather just sort of shut off once we got into December. And a lot of folks were hoping for maybe a white Christmas. That didn't happen. It was a warm Christmas. We had highs in the 50s and partly cloudy skies. And now we're wrapping up the month of December and we're looking forward. And a lot of folks are thinking, looks like we're in for another one of these warm, snowless winters like we've seen over the last several. Well, I want to allay those fears because it still looks like we are going to drop down into a colder pattern. And, cold is one of the ingredients for wintry weather. You got to have that in order to have the wintry weather. So I think the opportunities for wintry weather will certainly come, but it's taking a little while to get to that stage. Now, talking about where we are so far for the month of November, I've got a graphic that actually shows temperatures across the nation. This is the month of December, and you can see it's been sort of a blowtorch across much of the midsection of the country with much above normal temperatures across especially the upper Midwest. Here in the Ozarks, our temperatures are running about 5 degrees above normal for the month of November. That's significant. In November, our temperatures were running 6.5 degrees below normal. So we've seen a big seesaw in our temperature patterns here over the last couple of months. Now, I'll say, oftentimes when you have an El Nino season like we're in the middle of, your Decembers are often warmer than normal, and then the cold comes late. It comes in January, but especially later January into February and can linger into the spring season. And I think that may be what we're looking for as we work through the rest of the winter season. Okay,
looking ahead, how do you guys determine what the long-term weather patterns are going to be?
It's very tricky. We use a lot of different models for the day-to-day weather forecasts that we put out. And, models are just representations of the atmosphere. There's error in those representations because they are just representations. And when you get a little error in the front end of a model sequence, there's a lot of error usually coming out. I say all this because I want folks to understand that trying to predict how the season is going to play out is a very difficult task. It's difficult trying to forecast the next day to 7 days. So trying to forecast out over 3 months is very difficult because there's a lot of opportunities for error to work into that forecast. Now, what we typically have to do is we have to look at the weather players on the map as they stand going into the winter season. And we have a few that I can point out. In fact, we'll go to the next graphic. And what we're looking at are sea surface temperatures. And our oceans tend to be the drivers of what to expect for the upcoming season. And again, I mentioned that we are in the midst of an El Nino. What is El Nino? Well, there's a lot of things that go into what an El Nino is, but El Nino is I think, most signified by the warmer than normal sea surface temperatures that we find in the equatorial Pacific off the coast of South America. So looking at what are our current sea surface temperature anomalies, we can see that we've got this pool of warmer than normal water right there. This is also a special flavor of El Nino. It's El Nino Modoki. What that means is that as opposed to having the warmer than normal water temperatures all the way to the coastline of South America, it's more centrally based in the Pacific. And what that does is it tends to allow for more troughiness across the eastern U.S. than you might typically have in, say, a more traditional El Nino. I want to point out something else, John,
Sure.
and that is warmer than normal water temperatures up the west coast of the United States up into areas south of Alaska. This is what's called a positive Pacific decadal oscillation type of pattern. What that typically does is it helps enhance the potential for a ridge of high pressure in the atmospheric pattern across the western U.S. up through Canada and into Alaska. This is a pattern that favors cold weather and troughiness across the eastern U.S. So we've talked about the weather players that are on the map as they stand right now, and going forward, I would expect us to trend in this direction. More ridging in the western U.S. and Canada, more troughing in the eastern U.S. There's some other driving mechanisms out there that will also help to enhance this pattern, and looking at the long-range model guidance, it all suggests that this is where we're going. So if we go here, what we're going to find is a cold pattern setting up for the eastern half of the United States, and that cold looks like it will be centered here across parts of the Tennessee Valley, through the Carolinas, and maybe into the Northeast, where I think we're going to see the heaviest snowfall events, but we are also going to sample some of that cold here in the Ozarks, and we should see our snow chances increasing.
Okay, and can you see that more January, February, later in the season possibly?
I think looking at what we've got going in terms of the pattern, I think the cold, again, still expected, John. It looks like January will trend colder. It's kind of coming in fits and starts at the beginning of January, but it'll become more consistently cold over the back end of January, going into February, expecting a cold February, and obviously with the cold being a big ingredient for wintry weather, sure, I do expect us to see more opportunities at snow once that pattern sets up.
All right. Chief Meteorologist Jamie Warriner, thanks for joining us today. We'll be right back with more after this.